Great to be back. I really enjoyed talking to you last time, and I'm going to be talking to you, as Nigel said, about a brand new destination. In fact, this is a brand new talk, and 48 hours ago, this talk didn't exist, so I put it together yesterday. So, yeah, a few years ago, I made a list of the countries I thought I'd never visit, and Saudi Arabia was one of those. There are several I don't think I'll go to. I don't see myself going to Myanmar anytime soon. Venezuela's off the list for a bit too. But I made the decision to go to Saudi Arabia because this guy, Greg Askew, had guided some friends of mine, and he is an American. He actually lived in Saudi Arabia for about 5 years. He's fluent in Arabic. He lives in Texas, but twice a year he takes a group of birders from all around the world to have a look around Saudi Arabia. So I thought, right, had good reports, and he's pretty good value for money, I have to say, too. And having been with him, I can say he knows his way around Saudi Arabia, very good at getting out of any tight squeeze. The good news about Saudi Arabia is you can now get an e-visa easily. They used to only allow you in if you had some connection to do with business or existing family, but now tourism is widespread and you're very welcome. They're also very happy that same-sex couples, or you can share a room. So if you're going with a friend who's the same sex, you don't have to worry about causing any upset. It's a great place. So there's Greg's details in case anybody wants to look at it. It would be a good trip to do. I don't know, something like £3,000 or so will get you a week's holiday there. We saw just over 150 species in 8 days, which is pretty good, and which included 15 new ones for me, even though I've been to the Middle East many times before. So this is Saudi Arabia, with Yemen below it, Oman to the east, and of course all the Emirates and so on. And of course it's very close to Africa. I mean, this southwest corner of Saudi Arabia is only 400 kilometers from Africa. And that's something you'll see a lot of. You'll notice we have quite a lot of African birds and amongst the Arabian birds too. So flew into Riyadh and then headed, after doing a bit of birding around Riyadh, then went to Abha down in the southwest. And the thing about this is I'll show you with the next slide. You'll see you've got some wonderful mountains here, starting around Sana'a, which was called Aden in Yemen, right up through that southwest quarter of Saudi Arabia. And these Azir Mountains have the birds that are found just there and also in Yemen. And in the old days, when Saudi Arabia wasn't really open for business for birders used to go to Yemen. Big companies like BirdQuest used to offer that as a trip. Now, of course, Yemen's a bit of a mess, sadly. One or two of them are shared with Oman, which has got some good birds, particularly down in the southwest around, for example, Salalah. And of course, there are others, in the other Emirates. But generally speaking, this is the trip that's going to get you a lot of very special birds. And here I've actually put down what were my target birds for the trip. All of these were potentially available. The two we didn't see were the Arabian golden-winged grosbeak and the desert owl. I'll tell you about that later. I've done it alphabetically. There's a lot of Arabian birds, as you can see. And the only endemic to Saudi Arabia itself is the Azir magpie. So we've arrived in Riyadh. There are loads of flights. I flew with British Airways, but the Saudi Airways as well, of course, and arrived in this massive and very thriving city in the middle of the desert. And the very next morning, 3:45, I think I'd arrived at midnight, so it was not much sleep. 50 kilometers north of Riyadh, we went to Rodat Nura, which is an area in the desert just off a road, as you can see, and it's sparsely vegetated, not much there, but there is one bird that everybody particularly wants to see, and that's this one, the Arabian lark. So this was split from Dunn's lark in 2018. So you may have seen Dunn's lark, perhaps in Israel, and that would be the same species if you saw it, say, 10 years ago. And indeed, people used to see it in Israel quite a bit. But Dunn's lark now is a bird that you'd have to go to Mauritania or Sudan or somewhere in between in Africa to see it. And this, the Arabian lark, is now split off. So we had a few views of one bird, only one bird, and it came remarkably close. I was lucky because I'd been warned it was going to be a telescope job, and you'd have to be quick onto the scope, you might miss it. Well, I had it running around my feet, so really very, very happy about that. Incidentally, anything which was one of my big targets is in bright red and bold, just so you know. And anything which was just something I was happy to see is black and not bold, such as the greater hoopoo lark, which came along and showed itself in the same bit of desert. But I think these were the only two species we saw in this bit of desert. But I'm glad we went there because we didn't see this anywhere else at all. And later that day, we headed off as it was heating up to this place, Al Hir, 10 kilometers the other side of Riyadh. And this is actually a dried up waterhole with just a little bit of water left. And, a few palm trees and so on. And it didn't look very promising, but, we found a bit of water and immediately found black-winged stilts there holding territory and getting quite agitated, as we were probably the first humans they'd seen for a long time. And also this black scrub robin, a bird which I have seen before, but only I think a couple of times. You see them in West Africa, Senegal, and also sometimes in Israel. And of course, very familiar birds like the Eurasian hoopoo. In this particular instance, this is a resident bird, although they have migrants that come down as well. Well, it was getting hot, and 48 degrees at 11:36 in the day is hot enough for me. And so birding normally was get up early, be out in the field, first light, 5:30, 6 o'clock, and back to the hotel probably no later than about 1 o'clock. Bit of lunch, probably in a restaurant on the way, into the hotel, have the afternoon chilling, literally, and then out again before it got dark for a couple of hours birding late afternoon. Yeah, 48 degrees is the hottest I've ever been and hopefully will ever be. So just a reminder, we're in Riyadh, up the top there in the middle, and we're now going to head down to Aba, down in the south. And this is where the Azir Mountains are. And as you can see from this photo, they can at times be very green indeed. And it's hard to imagine this is Saudi Arabia, really, given how green and luscious they are. The rainfall in Aba is really through from sort of March to May. So if you arrive in June, as I did, you're going to find it very lush. And although it's going to be hot, there will be lots of birds breeding because there's plenty of vegetation. So probably don't want to go July, August. It's just that little bit too hot in my view. But we went to the Ryder Preserve, and this is actually, well, quite high. The highest points are about 2,800 meters. And we were, for most of the time, quite high up and on some pretty steep slopes. Gives you an opportunity to drive right down through the valley looking for birds all the way. And they've got terraced farming, and there are various things like old villages and old castles. Quite an interesting place, frankly, to see things like this castle build into the rocky hillside. So immediately we start seeing birds straight away. So the Yemen linnet, which is one of the local endemics. So I'm going to show you a map for each of these birds so you can see really where they exist. Very similar to our own linnet, but the colours are a bit more vibrant. It is found in roadside gullies, and it's only found in the mountains. So you can see, if you want to see this, you've either got to go to Yemen or Saudi Arabia, and clearly this, even though it's called Yemen linnet, this is the place to go at the moment. And similarly, the Yemen thrush, which is actually sadly now considered as near threatened, not doing so well. We saw it quite a bit on our trip, but we think it's possibly declining because of lower rainfall in recent years in Saudi Arabia and also in the mountains too. So sad to see that one as being under threat. And again, it's got a slightly more restricted distribution, just slightly higher up the mountain at higher altitudes. And the Yemen warbler. So this is a resident bird. They're all resident, these. It's mainly within the developed juniper woodland, and it's got a population of only about 9,000 pairs across its entire range, and it's considered near threatened. And This is also found in Yemen, and there are real worries that the population in Yemen is being really devastated by the war there. So that's making the Saudi population even more important than ever. Arabian warbler is a bird that some of you may have found before. It's actually found across, for example, in Oman and other places like that. So you can see down the bottom there. And also, it's also found in Africa. So it's not really that much of a special bird, but it's very pleased to see it again. And I hadn't actually seen it in Arabia. I'd only seen it in Africa itself. And Arabian green bee-eater. This one just getting termites off a wall. So I managed to go very close to the wall and get a shot of it as it was doing that. Well, much more widespread. So this one I have seen in Oman and seen it in the Emirates and also up in places like Israel and Egypt. So that is a bird that you're possibly going to have seen before. But this one, I don't know whether you would have done. I don't think so, because shining sunbird is a bird that's quite widely distributed over the years in Africa and in Arabia, and then they split it. So Arabian sunbird was split in 2015, so it's now an endemic bird to the region. And again, it's found across that southern area right the way through to Oman. So just to talk about this, you've got Saudi Arabia here in the middle. You've got the bottom left, which has the bird, that's Yemen. And then to the right, you've got Oman. And Oman is a good birding destination. I would recommend it highly, but it doesn't have most of these special birds, I'm afraid. Incidentally, that was, of course, a male sunbird. Females rather less colourful, brown and a bit of green. Another quite widespread bird in Arabia, I've seen it before, is Arabian babbler, but it was a target for many of the people I was traveling with who'd never been in this region. Very, very communal, really quite cheeky, comes up, tries to steal things. If you put anything down for a moment, it'll be looking at it, and always busy and active. And again, very widely distributed around the whole of the Gulf Coast. The Arabian Serin, less so. This is known by some people, certainly in some books, as the olive-rumped Serin, and it does have a bit of olive on it. You can just see a bit of olive on the plumage. So widespread species here, and also in Western Yemen. And it actually goes quite a long way for far north, quite close actually to the Western Palearctic border at, I think it's about 26 degrees north. So this is going to become a Western Palearctic bird before too long. And there's an adult feeding some chicks, which is nice to see. And there's the distribution. And as you can see, it is going quite a long way north. So the Western Palearctic line comes in just above there. And so that's going to be the next one, I think, that will be seen. Incidentally, Arabian sunbird has made it into the Western Palearctic as of last June, found by Pierre-André Crochet from France, who was on a scouting trip. So here's the connection with Africa. We're really close to Africa, aren't we? 400 or so kilometers to the west, not that far at all. And here's the African olive pigeon, which is a bird I've seen many times in Africa, up in wooded areas. But nice to see it in Arabia. I'd never seen it in Arabia before. And other African birds like this black-crowned chagra, which you can see in many places. But I'm keen to see these birds in Arabia because there is a chance that some of these will be split off, as has happened, as you've seen already with the sunbird. Another African bird, the grey-headed kingfisher, well, widely distributed right across Africa, so that one's not going to be split, I don't think. But also white-browed cuckoo, which again, readily available in Africa, but good to see it in Arabia. And this grey hornbill, African grey hornbill, very widely distributed bird, and very easy to see actually on our trip. So another good bird to tick off, as was African pipit. In this case, this is a migrant. This comes into Saudi Arabia in the summer only. Not many of those seen on our trip. African paradise flycatcher. This is a male with his gorgeous red and white plumage. He's not grown his full length of tail at this stage. and with a beautiful yellow, a blue wattle round the eye. Not many of those seen, but good to have it on the list. And here's another one that is particularly an African species. You can see this down in certainly Kenya and I think Ethiopia. This is the Gambaga flycatcher, just very similar to a spotted flycatcher in many, many ways, and behaving like a spotted flycatcher, flycatching and sitting in trees. Thankfully, still enough for me to take a photo. Incidentally, of all the photographs I'm showing you tonight, I took with my bridge camera. I use a Canon SX70 bridge camera, which is really quite a cheap camera. It's about £500. It's got a zoom lens that goes up to 1,400 millimeters if you really want to push it to the extreme. I don't do anything like as big as that. I'm mainly using it around about maybe 600 millimeters. But if you ever need a lightweight camera with a lens built in that works well, this is the one I'd recommend, the Canon SX70. And I haven't been paid to say that. Rupel's weaver, another African bird, nesting in colonies there, and this one actually doing a bit of display whilst I was photographing it. And the brown woodland warbler, which is another one that's widely spread around parts of Africa, superficially a little bit like a chiffchaff to look at. Now there are white eyes, and you'll see this one again a bit later. This is the Abyssinian white eye, which you can also see in Ethiopia. But there are lots of races of Abyssinian white eye, and it's worth noting where you saw the ones you saw, because two have just been split off in the last year in Ethiopia to be brand new species. So make a note of whenever you see an Abyssinian white eye, because they are for splitting them. White spectacled bulbul, don't think that's going to get split off. It's quite a widespread and common bird, and just like all the bulbuls, really. African stonechat, which we saw on only a small number of occasions. Sometimes we forget stonechats really came from Africa. We think of it very much as a British bird, but actually it is an African bird, and the one we have is an offshoot of the African one, although African stonechat now is a species in its own right. So moving on to a new site. This is Al Habala, and it's a very popular place for people to come and see these incredible rocks. What a wonderful view. Really, really sheer and steep. It's hard to actually convey to you just how massive that is, but perhaps if you look at the buildings on the top, you can get a feel for how big it is. Well, some good birds here. Yemen Serin. This is actually a bird that I have seen before. It is rather drab. It can be distinguished from the Arabian Serin by the brown plumage, streaky plumage, and it actually does have a bit of a dark moustache, which you can just see in that picture, but not so well on this particular bird. And as you can see, Yemen Serin, again, sparsely distributed at the tops of the mountains and the higher altitudes, and just a couple of spots where they can be seen in Oman, where I had actually seen them before. So another one that was a big target for everyone, the Arabian wheatear. So this was previously treated as a subspecies of eastern mourning wheatear, which has been split from. Key difference is that the Arabian wheatear, the male and female, look completely different, whereas in the mourning wheatears, they're actually rather similar. So this is a male, and he's singing. Different kind of map to show the range, but you can see, as it's only just been split, but you can see the range of that one around Arabia. So not just Saudi Arabia, you could see that somewhere else. Similarly, Tristram starling could be seen elsewhere as well. Very much in evidence on buildings, a bit like the red-winged starling you might have seen in Africa. Named after Henry Tristram, who was the canon of Durham Cathedral, actually. But he found time to explore Africa and was a short-lived supporter of Darwinism. Anyway, he's the name, the person after whom that bird was named. So another one of the splits, buff-breasted wheatear, which we saw at several locations actually. Nowhere well though as here, where this bird just sat here, it was singing most of the time. So this was until very recently part of the red-breasted wheatear, which has now been split into two. The other one is rusty-breasted wheatear, which you'll find in Ethiopia. But this buff-breasted wheatear now is the one you'll find only in Arabia. And as you can see, again, it's one that's split between Saudi Arabia and Yemen. Well, crested larks are widespread in Africa and Europe, but just thought I'd take a photograph of one because, again, crested larks, it's quite a few different races, and it's worth to see them. This one was unbelievably hot. It was in all that hot temperature, and it was by a water hole. As was this African collared dove, which was coming down to drink. It's one of the good things. You can just park your car quite close to a water hole, and all the birds come down and start drinking quite close, and they don't show much fear. And indeed, so was the case with this Nile Valley sunbird, a molting male. He was a bird that I had first seen in Egypt in the Nile Valley, of course. You can see them in Cairo, at the Cairo Zoo, actually. Another African bird, the African silverbill, very common, flocks of them all over the place, particularly trying to get water from the water holes. And not so conspicuous, the cinnamon-breasted bunting, quite often found in bushes and sometimes on buildings in some of the farms and villages as we were traveling around. So another target, not the best photo I've taken, but this is the rufous-capped lark. So this was recently in 2016 split from Blandford's lark. So again, a lot of people on the trip, even if they'd been traveling before and seen it, now they were getting a new bird, and here it is. It's found in Arabia, but it's also found just in Somalia, on the other side in Africa, and a little bit in Ethiopia. But frankly, you don't really want to go to those places. They're not terribly safe. Well, there's only one woodpecker species in the Arabian Peninsula, and that's Arabian woodpecker. And we had a group of, I think, 3 or 4 flying around from tree to tree. And this is just lucky to get one stopped briefly, and I got a shot of it. Again, it's traveling further north than many of the species in Arabia. And I think, again, that could be one that makes its way into the Western Palearctic before too long. Remembering that climate change means that these birds are now sometimes more likely to move north, although, of course, they do require the habitat. And I'm not sure that there are enough trees at the moment in the area we're looking at the top end of that range. This is a widely distributed species in North Africa. For example, go to Morocco, you'll see them a lot. And this is the long-legged buzzard. And you can see the long legs, it trails them down and it hovers before pouncing on something that's unfortunate just beneath it. Great grey shrike, but here we have the race Orcheri, and it's hard to say whether I could really tell what would be different about that, other than it is rather pale and very, very white around the throat. So very sadly, we haven't had any great grey shrikes in the New Forest other than I think one on one day this winter. So it's a disappearing bird for most of us in Britain, I'm afraid, as their population in Scandinavia is declining, and of course they don't feel the need to come as far south as they used to due to climate change again. So we went to an area of farmland, Sunbar. So this is where they have these massive circular irrigated fields where there's a huge irrigation circle that goes around probably half a kilometre wide, putting water into the ground. And of course, that means there are furrows where the wheels go from that. And we were walking along the furrows to see what there were. And of course, they were also farming the area. Well, lots of Western cattle egrets, and just always nice to get a good close view. We have them nesting in Hampshire now, but I don't get to look at them very closely, so I just wanted to get a nice shot of an adult there in breeding plumage. And as I was doing that, white-winged black terns migrating through, heading, presumably still heading north towards Russia. They were coming through, or maybe they were failed breeders and they were heading south, hard to know. It was middle of June. And this is what we were looking for. It's a bit of a rotten photo, but this is the common button quail, which was just walking along one of those little tracks, and I was walking behind it, but it kept just far enough ahead for me not to get a really good photo. And the whole time above us at this point was singing bushlark, never stopped singing the whole time, even though it was unbearably hot. So I managed to get a photo of that as it was hovering just above us. Now, there are one or two birds that come to Arabia in the summer from Africa, and this is one of them, the white-throated bee-eater. So I was pleased to get this one nice and close. It just flew in, landed for about 3 seconds, happened to have my camera in the right position, and bang, and then it flew off. So it's a bit of a grainy shot, this, but this is another big target for all of us and really gave us the runaround. This is the Arabian golden sparrow. Now, there'd been a previous trip about, I think, 3 months before this one. And at that point, there'd been a flock of 700 at the place where I was trying to look for this bird. We had about 20 adults and juveniles, but it was the only place we saw them, and they were rather distant. So this is a bit of a grainy shot, but this is an adult Arabian golden sparrow. And there's the distribution. It makes its way just into Africa as well. Of course, at that point, there's not much distance between one side from Africa to Arabia, so it's not surprising that the birds do make it across there. So we've got a few wetland areas, and this is an inland wetland, Jazan Wadi Dan, and there were plenty of waders. I don't know if you can see them just there on the peninsula, but those are actually black-tailed godwits. Given that it's June, I guess these birds were heading north. Just hard to know, really. And also on the coast itself, Amak. So we're now looking out into the Red Sea, and we've got all the Red Sea seabirds on offer, and hopefully not too far away. And also osprey, which is resident in this part of Arabia. So the osprey population around the world, you've got all these birds from Northern Europe and Scandinavia heading down to Africa, and also birds in Australia and so on moving around. But in Arabia, they are resident. They don't move at all. And Western reef heron. So we've got two different color phases here. We've got the dark phase and the light phase. Just quite surprising that these are the same species. If you ever want to identify Western reef heron, my tip is to look at the angle of the leg. If you look at that, it's got a very short top to the leg. It looks rather strange. Sorry, rather long top to the leg, not short top to the leg. The bottom part of the leg is shorter than the top, is what I'm really trying to say. And here's a purple heron, widespread around the wetlands of this part of Arabia and coming across from Africa, of course. Striated heron, widely distributed around the wetlands, but of course there aren't many wetlands in Arabia, so it's really along this coastal strip where you get them, but there are plenty of mangroves and plenty of striated herons in there, and indeed crab plover as well, which is a bird I have seen before, but most people on the trip had never seen before, so it was a really big moment for them. Fantastic bird. I like that shot with that reflection. Greater flamingos, lots of them around, traveling around Arabia. I don't think they nest in Arabia. I think these are all birds that have come in from Europe, and are just resting there. They're probably non-breeders. Brown booby, quite widespread around the Arabian Sea, and available along the coast. Plenty of opportunities to see that bird. There's one just resting on a boat, nice and close for us. And gulls too, plenty of them. So this is the white-eyed gull, which I think I'd seen in Kenya before, or maybe I'd seen Oman. I'd seen it. So basically, a bit like a black-headed gull in terms of shape and everything else, but obviously a very dark head. And then the sooty gull, which I have seen in Africa, with its sooty head, and it's got red on the beak as well. Much bigger bird, much bigger than a herring gull. A few terns. It's a real challenge to identify some of these when you're looking at crested terns. So this is a great crested tern, which probably we all used to call just crested tern, with a little bit of marking on the head, not too deeply marked, whereas the lesser crested tern is so much smarter. Just to give you a comparison back. There you go. There's the greater, there's the lesser. So plenty of them around, easy to see and close as well, and also a few slender-billed gulls. as well. This one I think is in heavy molt at the time. And a few wading birds around the coast. We've got Kentish plovers nesting where they can on shingle, and very, very interesting. We flushed this one off a nest, and it was desperate to get back on the eggs because it didn't want the eggs to cook. If that, whereas most birds, you think of waders getting back onto their eggs to keep them warm, this bird was getting back onto its eggs to keep them cool. And sort of similar looking, but much bigger eye, great big eye, a greater sand plover, which would be, I guess, a non-breeding bird. It's not in breeding plumage, but I guess that bird is waiting to go either further north to breed, or maybe is just a non-breeder having some time out. So I mentioned Abyssinian white-eye, and I mentioned that, you need to look at the races. Well, I don't think we actually really know whether this is a separate race or not, but there is a race that's found right across Arabia. But this particular form is only found in mangroves. So I put it originally on the other list as at the beginning as the mangrove white-eye, and I think it probably will be split because these birds are a very isolated population. And similarly, I didn't take this photograph, but this is a European reed warbler, but it's the local race that's found and is resident in Arabia. So some of them are migrants, but this one is a resident. And if you look on this picture here, you'll see purple along the southwest or the western coast of Saudi Arabia, and that means they're resident there. They're not migrating at all. Whereas the yellow areas is where the European birds come through when they're on their migration coming through. Well, Tonoma is an interesting area to go to for its really huge landscape, and it's got a few special species, and indeed it has the best bird in Saudi Arabia if you're turned on by endemics, and I indeed am. But not just is it scenically wonderful, it's got some water, so of course it attracts in a lot of birds that are passing through on migration, or indeed just in the middle of the day, birds find it hot and they want to come down and drink. So the big target, and this has got to be the biggest bird of the trip for me, is the azure magpie. So we're in the Azure Mountains, and this was formerly treated as a subspecies of just the Eurasian magpie, but it's got a very different vocalization to our magpie. And here's another shot. Here it is flying. The wings and tail are blackish instead of bluish green. You can't really pick that up, but hopefully you can see how black that tail is. There's no color in that other than black. And the population of this bird, entire population, is about 100 pairs. So it really is, it's considered endangered, and its habitat is being fragmented quite heavily by local farming. But here's a close-up of one that came down, and I zoomed in and got a shot of the head. So the azure magpie, definitely for me, star bird of the trip. Palestine sunbird, it's a bird I've seen in quite a few places in Arabia, but always nice to see. And this is a male with his wonderful iridescent blue plumage. But it was a bit of a surprise to find this European honey buzzard. I did wonder for a moment whether this was going to be a crested honey buzzard, but it flew, and it's a European honey buzzard. And this is obviously a migrant that's, I guess, on its way north and has just delayed its journey. I mean, honey buzzards are very late to breed. We're lucky here in Hampshire to have about 8 pairs or so. Of course, they're in Wales as well. And they do breed late. So, they might arrive in May or June, but they really don't get going on breeding until July. So it's got time to get to Africa. But possibly it might just have been a young bird. Hard to know from this plumage exactly how old this bird is, but I suspect it's a young one. We went to an area called Al Wata, and the woodlands here, juniper and other sort of evergreen plants, clothing the hillside. And thankfully, they don't need much rain, so they manage to survive. And it's a good area for one or two of the big targets. Now, it's not a great photograph, it's not going to get any awards, but it is an Arabian partridge. This is widely distributed in the region. It's one that I have seen before in Oman, and actually in Saudi Arabia, the population is thriving, I'm pleased to say. And you can see it's found in quite a few places around Arabia. So not under too much pressure at all. But the one that really is a big target is Philby's partridge. So Philby's partridge is much more narrowly distributed, and it was named after, well, there's the distribution. So it's only again in our area between Saudi Arabia and Yemen, and not much of Yemen, frankly, but named after this character. Really, he is a bit of a strange chap, Harry Philby, or Harry St. John Philby. He styled himself as Sheikh Abdullah, and he was an Arabist, an explorer, and he used to travel right around Arabia and crossed some of the most difficult parts of Arabia, of Saudi Arabia, the what's known as the Empty Quarter. He'd be an interesting chap to meet, but sadly we're too late. Well, we've got Arabian Scops owl, which we went to a tourist park where basically all the local Saudis go for a meal in the evening, and all these Saudis were sitting out having picnics and so on, and we were walking around with spotlights, spotlighting the trees. I mean, it's just the kind of thing you couldn't have done 10 years ago. You'd have been arrested before you even got the spotlight on. Anyway, Arabian Scops owl. Again, you can get that one in Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and Oman. But this one particularly wanted this. I've seen spotted eagle owl before, but never seen Arabian eagle owl. And this was split a few years ago. I don't think everybody actually splits it, but it's a different bird, I think, bound to be from its distribution. And you can see that's where it lives, dotted around the Emirates, but also Oman, bit in Yemen. Not that widespread though in Saudi Arabia. So it's one you if you don't get it here, you get it somewhere else, like Oman. So we're getting towards the end. We're at an area called Kyra Forest Park, and the big target here was golden winged grosbeak, which I didn't see. But anyway, despite that, we did have Arabian waxbill, which is another bird that I particularly wanted to see. Hadn't seen it before. Not easy to photograph. They're very closely associated with the irrigated agricultural areas. They've spread into the lowlands, particularly in the winter, but we're in the summer, so they're in the highlands. It's the only time I really got a decent view, and that's the distribution. You can see, actually in Saudi Arabia, it's not got a very big distribution at all, so I was quite lucky to get that. Violet-backed starling, well, I've seen that before, but this is actually an African bird that migrates to Arabia in the summer. This is a male looking really superb, probably the best looking starling, I'd say. A migrant coming through, European red-rump swallow. They've messed around with all the swallows since, so you have to really think about what you've been looking at. But this one was a European one. You've got African, you've got also the Eastern one as well. And little rock thrush, which is just one of the many rock thrush species in Arabia. That's one I hadn't photographed before, so it's the smallest of all the rock thrushes you can see. Thought I'd show you a few of the plants, just a few. I mean, Arabian primrose, I thought was just gorgeous. I love the way it was sort of fluffy, furry plant. And this, the desert rose. Now, this is an amazing plant. It doesn't need much water, as you can tell. Look a bit like a baobab. In fact, I believe it's related to baobab. And the flowers at the top are like this, and it's a very nice smell too. It's a super plant. You'd never expect a plant looking like that at the bottom to look like that at the top. Bit of a mismatch. Some of the butterflies, this is a plain tiger, which we saw on many occasions, and rather similar to our wall brown. Here's the Arabian wall brown. I don't think I'd know the difference if I saw one. And a swallowtail, this one, the citrus swallowtail. Sadly, slightly damaged wing, but anyway, I got a shot. And I don't normally spend much time looking at reptiles and amphibians, but you know, there are plenty of reptiles there. This is the Anderson's rock agama. And this one and the other one they have, they're both beautifully blue, although this one's a much brighter. I put Yemen, it was typo. Yemen rock agama, much brighter blue than the other one. And lots of frogs, marsh frogs in any area of water. They multiply very quickly indeed. A couple of mammals for you, the dromedary camel. Obviously, some of these are domesticated, but this couple were just wandering around, although they do obviously have ropes on them. So I imagine somebody owned them at some point. Maybe they do still own them and they're just going to collect them later. And these are quite character. So this is the Hamadryas baboon, a male, I believe, and with a fine set of teeth. And he is showing his dominance over everyone. Well, what did we miss? Well, yeah, I hate going on a trip and seeing a sign saying dip. Always bad news. So what did we dip on? Well, we dipped on desert owl. So this is a bird you can see much more easily elsewhere. I expect a few of you have seen it. Of course, it used to be Hume's tawny owl, and it's found in Israel, where Hadaram Shirahai used to show them to people, found in Oman, found in Yemen, found in a little bit in Africa too. I've never actually seen that bird. I've heard it but in Jordan, but never seen it. So it's one to go back for, or maybe go somewhere else for. And yeah, this one hurt. The Arabian golden winged grosbeak. So the problem with this is it's actually found more easily in March, April, and May. And I think they're breeding once you get to June. So you're only going to get them flying to and from where the food is to where the nest is. And we decided to split up along a bit of roadway across 1 mile. We had radios so we can talk to each other. And it's the usual thing. What do you, if you split up, if you split up, someone will see it. And of course, two people did see it, and I wasn't one of them. But I've also missed this bird in Oman. So, I'm getting used to missing it now. I'm just going to have to go back for a third time. Distribution, as you can see, is not very wide, just in Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and also in Oman. I believe it is easier in Oman, so I think I will go back there. That's around the part of Oman called Salalah. So yeah, they were the two that we missed. Now, if you'd like to read about this, I write for Birdwatch Magazine on a regular basis. I have a monthly column about destinations, but this is a special article in itself, which is coming out this next week, in the next issue, the April issue of Birdwatch. So tells you the story of my trip and hopefully will inspire you to have a look at this as a destination. I actually think it is a very good place to go to. I would happily go again. It's good value for money, lots of birds. I think Greg Askew is a great leader, and but you don't have to go with him. You can go with BirdQuest, and more tour operators are starting to feature it. But I would go soon because some of those birds, as we have heard, are declining. Okay, back to you,
Thank,
Nigel. I've shared the
thank,
screen.
thank you, Keith. That was brilliant, fitting finale, and we are very privileged to have the world premiere of that talk and see it before it appears in print in Birdwatch magazine. But I, for one, will look forward to your article very much and read it with added interest after tonight's talk, which I'm sure has engendered a lot of questions. So, if I might kick off. The Azure magpie, clearly your star bird. Could you tell us a little bit more about it? I mean, is it as communal as our magpies? Is it always associated with man? Um,
No,
or
it's
good
not.
or
It's
bad?
actually found. It's found in the open countryside. So that although they were quite close to a village, there was no suggestion that they were relying on us. Even though
No.
I ended up taking a photograph of one on the street lamp, which slightly spoils that image. No suggestion of that. They were nesting in a pine tree, nowhere near human habitation. I
Mm,
saw a question asking how I got from Riyadh to Aba. Yeah, took an internal flight. So you basically just fly on the local airlines and went a little bit further north and flew back from there.
thank you. Any other questions?
Anybody, I'm curious, anybody thinking of going as a result of this, just put your thumbs up. You think it might be a place you'd like to go to. I mean, it's the kind of place you as a you as a group could even go there. You could probably just book Greg Askew to take you as a group to go there, and he'd give you a good price. I saw the question, are there local guides? I think there probably will be. We didn't actually see any local guides, and I imagine Greg might know of some, but no, I don't know. Uh, as obviously tourism's new, so
Yeah.
we didn't see any other birders. There are some birders, but they're mainly Europeans who are stationed there.
Hmm.
But hopefully over time, it's something that will develop. Would I say a guide is essential, or are you safe to self-guide? I wouldn't self-guide. You could self-guide yourself, but get an interpreter, maybe. That might be a sort of good value option. You can certainly use eBird. I mean, Greg is very open about his sightings. He puts all his sightings on eBird, so you can see the places I've talked about, buy the magazine articles, see some of them I mentioned there. You just would need an interpreter. There are checkpoints. People in Saudi Arabia, in officialdom, don't generally speak English well enough to be able to understand what's going on. So, you could spend a lot of time. You wouldn't be at risk, but you could spend a lot of time in a police station, trying to get out of the police station.
Hmm. Right. Thanks for the warning. Any other questions?
There's not many places I'd actually just wander off around the world. I mean, Australia and New Zealand, of course, and Europe. You can usually get out of trouble in Europe. But in Africa, I mean, I used to go around wandering around South Africa. I've done 5 trips to South Africa and 2 to Namibia. Certainly wouldn't go to South Africa now without some local intelligence.
Hmm. Hmm.
Most of the trips I do, I try and hire a local guide if I can, rather than go with a tour operator. And that's only because, when you've got about 9,000 birds on your list,
Hmm.
chances are you've seen 80% of the world's birds. Chances are you're really going to be looking just for maybe a small number.
Hmm.
I didn't mind on this trip because it's just 8 days and it's great fun. And I knew I was going to get them all anyway. I was getting 2 or 3 each day.
Yeah.
But
Hmm.
yeah, generally I use a private guide.
Right. Thank you.
So no one's put their thumbs up to say they were thinking of going.
Oh, that's a pity.
Keith,
Yes,
yeah, I was going to ask a question. Was it June? Was that the month that you went?
it was. It was the hot, not quite the hottest month of the year. It's a good month to go. It's actually, but I suspect if you did choose to go, I would say go maybe April, May. Better chance of the golden winged grosbeak. But it
Mhm.
was June, yes.
Okay, thanks.
Everybody thought I was mad, but you're in the mountains, so you're actually
Yeah.
up high. I mean, I was wearing a fleece much of the time. Early mornings I was cold.
Right.
Mhm. Yep. Okay, thanks, Keith.
No problem.
On a number of occasions, you've mentioned recent splits, taxonomic splits.
Yeah.
In an evolutionary sense, do we know much about when these divergences are likely to have occurred, Keith? Do you know? Are they very recent themselves?
I
In an
don't know, I'm afraid.
Mm, mm. It's interesting, though, isn't it? Is that region particularly blessed with similar taxa, do you
I
think?
think what's happening is that more and more people are looking at DNA
Mm,
and they're working out that actually these birds are very, very far apart,
mm.
as the use of DNA on specimens and on live birds
Yeah.
is evolving. So, you know, how many bird species are in the world? Well, right now, it's about, what, 11,200 and something, which compares to 8,500 when I started doing world birding. So we've
Oh, my
already
word.
added 3,000.
Gosh.
I think it's predicted that when all this really settles down, there's going to be about 20,000 species
Oh,
because that's how many different forms there are around the world. I mean, just look at the island thrush in Southeast Asia, which is spread across many of the islands around the Philippines, Christmas Island, and Indonesia. There's now 18 species of island thrush, all split last summer.
mm,
Having said that, that was nice because I got 3 extra birds with that move. But the IOC, who do all the decisions on this at the moment, if you follow the IOC, they just 2 weeks ago announced a whole load of lumps. So they split a few, but they mainly lumped, and I actually lost 20 birds in one go on one day. So
oh, goodness.
a good friend of mine was on 9,004 and he's now on 8,900 and something. And he was a bit grumpy about it. I said, well,
he
you just
gutted.
have another party.
Mm.
I'm not quite on 9,000. I'm on 8,912 or something thereabouts.
Yeah, pretty close.
Yeah, I shall
That's
get 9,000 this year.
right. Well, good luck with that. But yeah, swings and roundabouts, isn't it? As a result of taxonomic revision. But interesting, really interesting that that's the case, that we we increasingly know more about the peculiarities of populations of birds, and that was really amplified by during the talk with several of the species. Really interesting. And one worries about that woodpecker being forced north with climate change if there aren't any woods. So that doesn't look too good, does it?
Well, I think it'll be okay in the south of its range. I just mean that it's probably not going to be able to advance north quite as well as, say, a sunbird would,
Yeah.
or a sparrow, or a bunting.
Were you aware on your travels of any conservation efforts per se for birds?
Well, not specifically for birds, but I did visit, for example, the Ryder Preserve, which that was a nature reserve.
Yeah.
We had to get a permit to go in there. We couldn't go in earlier than a certain time. So, yeah, nature conservation definitely very much visible in certain places. But bird conservation, not something you particularly think about. A lot of the bird conservation has actually been about things like bustards.
Yes.
Primarily because the Saudis want to hunt bustards, so they want to create breeding opportunities for them so they can then hunt those birds they've bred.
Yeah. And what about bird ringing? Any bird ringing initiatives out there? Because there must be a lot of movement of migrants. You mentioned quite a number.
Yeah, there's not much bird ringing, so there is a bit of ringing done by one or two of the Europeans who are based in Riyadh or not quite sure where they would be, but mainly Riyadh, I think. I saw somebody put here, Alex has put, were
Yes.
there any birds elsewhere in Saudi Arabia you didn't see, or did your trip cover all available species? Well, there definitely were some other birds that we didn't see, but they weren't things that were in any way a target for any of us. So, they would just be larks and one or two other things and buntings and so on that we hadn't picked up. I didn't put every single bird up. I didn't put house sparrow up, for example, and a few other things too.
Thank you. Right, final call for any questions. Well, if there aren't any questions, just before I thank Keith personally, I want to thank Steve Cully. Take this opportunity whilst we've got a good number of people out there for another amazing program. Steve, program secretary, has excelled again. He's put together 17 memorable talks since we first met in early October, when indeed Steve got us off to a roaring start with his talk on birding in Panama. And since then, we've had a wonderful talk to look forward to every week, supplemented by several talks, I think 4 additional talks organised kindly by the Avon branch of the North Wales Wildlife Trust. So my thanks to them, to Susan Andrew and her team for complementing our programme. It works so well, and I hope you have all enjoyed it. And that combination of Zoom and face-to-face, I think, is working well at the moment. But please let us know if you've got any comments about the format of the group's talks. We'd love to hear from you. Take the opportunity at the AGM or let us know by email beforehand, and we can adjust things if necessary. But at the moment, it seems to be working pretty well. And we're very grateful for your continued support. Gary, our Zoom host, was looking at the numbers of YouTube visits that we've had for many of our talks, and several of them are into the several hundreds. For instance, Keith's talk last year on the status of Hampshire bird has attracted over 400 subsequent viewings, which is great. It's really nice to know that the talks are not only enjoyed on the night, but for a long time thereafter by a good number of people. Well, tonight was a fitting finale. It really was, Keith, to our already superb programme. And it's lovely to hear from a person of your caliber and experience visiting a venue that was new for you. And your excitement showed through it all. And also the way that you looked at the birds, noticing the differences in plumage and habit and behavior and distribution. It came out beautifully well. You are a great raconteur, a very easy person to listen to, given the amount of information you're conveying. It never felt in any way difficult to absorb and to enjoy. And I'm sure, although perhaps nobody put up their hand immediately to say they want to go to Arabia, several of us certainly will, as it becomes more and more accessible. And it's just really pleasing to know that somewhere on such a large scale is now available for ornithologists to visit and enjoy. And I really hope it has pays dividends for the conservation and the future of birds out there under changing circumstances. And really, as with so many of our speakers, I hope we never take it for granted the amount of effort that goes into these talks in terms of the effort at the time, the effort when you get home putting together these talks. It's considerable, and it's all there for our enjoyment in our own homes this evening, and we thank you very much for that. We do hope you'll consider coming back again to give us more of your wonderful knowledge of the world's birds. We will really look forward to it if you do. But for tonight, thank you very much indeed to providing, as I say, a very fitting finale to a wonderful season for Bird Group. Thank you very much, Keith. Good night.
Thank you, Nigel. Enjoyed doing it.